So, assalamu alaikum, folks. Very nice to be back and see that so many of us are still interested in this matter of the 8 stations of attention. There were quite a number of questions yesterday, so I'm just going to wade straight into them. There were 4 of them were from Aisha Adil. And actually, I'm going to put them up together because Aisha's questions up together because they really do all sort of relate. So the first question is, will disillusionment with one's worldly achievements and dissatisfaction with a lack thereof necessarily result in the same transition? And what does the role of a victim narrative play in stagnating our evolvement? Now, there's 2 ways. So Aisha's, you're perfectly right. There's 2 ways that one can view or experience disgruntlement going into a midlife crisis. The one is that you've actually achieved what you wish to achieve, and despite having achieved what you wish to achieve, you're still the same miserable so-and-so than what you were before. So in other words, you're disillusioned with the anticlimax of success. You've pursued this cup that you think is the ambrosia of delight and pleasure and fulfillment, and it turned out to be a chalice of dust. So that's the one problem. The one problem is that you got there and it's an anticlimax. The second problem is that you've pursued the best to the best of your ability, and you actually haven't achieved anything. Now, these 2 things aren't necessarily the same, and actually what distinguishes them is a victim narrative. So a victim narrative basically blames the other for the experience of being in your own skin. And it's easier for me to blame the other for being in my own, for what it feels like to be me, for the sense of failure, if I think I've done what I could that was required of me and I didn't receive my just deserts. In other words, I've put in the effort and I failed. And I've put in the effort and I've not achieved what I wanted to achieve. And then I therefore feel cheated. So then I hold a victim narrative. Whereas the other possibility is I've put in what I wanted to achieve. I've put in the effort. I may even have achieved it, but I'm still not satisfied. I'm still not, this yearning hasn't been addressed. While you're blaming the world, while you're holding a victim narrative, you cannot progress. Because the move into the station of meaning is really a move of turning your attention inward, and so any blame of the world is basically disabling, because the one who's at issue is the self. So it's much easier to get to that point when you're having a chalice of dust after having the achievement, rather than having put in all the effort and then think you've been cheated. Right. So victim narrative and progression into any of the inward stages is kind of like challenging. It's not really going to be helpful. The next question, are the latter 4 stages necessarily proportional to one's age? I see some people in their 30s being very inwardly gathered, and some people in their 60s still deeply entrenched in the maintenance of the social order. Yes, true. There's beyond these, after the first 3 phases, after kind of one's adolescence, in fact, from one's adolescence onward, the degree to which you tarry in any one of those stages is really up to you. Because otherwise you couldn't account for the fact that there is such a thing as a spiritually talented person who has immense insight at a comparatively young age. This does happen. I mean, I've seen people like that. And then also, to just confirm your point, I've seen people in their 60s being deeply entrenched, still in being very judgmental and keeping the social order running. What can be some of the triggers that facilitate the journey? So there's really only one, and that's suffering. Suffering and failure. There aren't any others. That you move on with the dysfunction of a particular way of being is visited on you. If you look at any one of the stages, we say we play, there's two drums being played. There's a conservative drum and there's a progressive drum. You play this progressive drum increasingly because the staying in the place that you are in when you're playing the conservative drum just doesn't cut it. It's no longer interesting. It doesn't scratch the itch. So it's failure that is the engine of our growth. Failure and loss is the engine of our growth. And you see this, people who get too much success, particularly too young in their lives, very often atrophy. They stay quite immature. And then from Afia, if the intent model explains, this is actually, I think, a very useful question, Afia. If the intent model explains the transformation from being a taker to being a giver, that is true. That's exactly what the intent model does. Is the attention model an understanding of understanding form, meaning to becoming a cause? So in other words, what I understand, we say the attention model is a move from how things appear to how things appear. How things appear is just in their form, but how things appear is actually that form arises out of meaning that you ascribe to it. So it's actually it's the inward that defines the outward, and not the outward that defines inward. So you can say that. You can say that. So if you were to just say that maybe a little bit more eloquently, you'd say the attention model is an understanding of of moving from how things appear to how things appear. But it just struck me when I first read the question, Afia, that probably another way of saying this, that if the intent model of consistent with a shift of the intention from taking to giving is a shift of attention from being outwardly gathered to being inwardly gathered. So you can also say the attention model is a model of understanding the shift from outward gatheredness to inward gatheredness. Right. So, folks, we carry on. So, yesterday, now we're getting into the realm of where the usefulness of the intent model breaks down. Where attention is really the kind of the useful kind of framing to work with. If you want to understand the lie of the land, if you want the cartography of the inward, for the latter stages of our development, this is a far better sort of framing to understand the landscape. Because, and I want to go back to this thing that we've just spoken to Afia about, that is that the big movement of attention in the maturation journey is a movement from being outwardly gathered to being inwardly gathered. When you start off, you are in fact inwardly gathered, because in fact that's exactly what an embryo is. And at birth you're still half asleep and you're not, but then you start being caught by the tinsel of the world and you come increasingly closer and closer to the window of perception. You're on it, and then you start realizing that parts of you are in the window, and then you start wanting to appear. You start to get so outwardly gathered, you actually want to be one of the big ones up on stage, the star of the show. And it's interesting that they use the word star, because star is also a galactic thing that sits on the other side of the black velvet of the sky. That's amazing. So you want to be like one of those things, a star, stand out, majestic out there. So that's kind of the move away. And then there's like a sense that kind of comes in the station of the significance. So hold on. Let's not get too big for our boots here. Let's learn how to collaborate. We can't just always compete and be the one standing out. We've actually got to make all of these competing things work. We've got to get a balance between the requirements of the people around us. And so we become the custodians of the good order. That's the station of the significant, very honorable people. We respect them highly and have great compassion for their misery. As we indicated yesterday, the station of the significant, there's a growing suspicion that the whole project of keeping balance between all of these paradoxical and even contradictory pulls is actually not sustainable and not possible. So you get an increasing pull towards the inward. You start playing this drum of the inward more and more loudly, and then one day, as we said, you flip into the station of meaning. And this is what we described yesterday. The station of meaning is the apex of the station of meaning is what did we get to yesterday? Did we do this? We did meaning, eh? Or we were going to talk about meaning today. Help me. We did meaning yesterday. Thank you. Grandparent. Oh, there you go. Fantastic. Thank you. You see, this is why you can't trust old people. They forget what they did yesterday. I wouldn't trust myself as far as I could throw myself. Anyhow, so this, and as we indicated, this sort of increase, yes, now I remember, this sort of increasing kind of move towards gatheredness, towards intimacy and withdrawing inward, basically flips us into the next station, which is actually quite short. And that's a station of complete inwardness. So all of the aspiration, it's like an inverting of attention. You know, prior to this, your attention has still been out there. It started to come back. Now, literally, you spend huge amounts of time exploring the back end of your being. I think a lot of the conditions that are clinically designated as diseased, the conditions of decrepitude and of old age, I actually don't think are diseased. I think they're a very sensible reaction to a very real kind of endeavor, and that is, I mean, so if, let's say, for instance, an Alzheimer's person, if you look at them from the outside, their eyes are blank. I mean, you can't understand why they no longer recognize you. They kind of you know, I mean, it's very injurious. You go and see your uncle who you had this incredible regard for, and I mean, he looks at you while he's drooling into your tea, and he doesn't understand who you are, and you find it very hurtful. But he's clearly happy as Larry because he's smiling like the village idiot. So, and this is true evidently for most people with Alzheimer's, not all, but most people with Alzheimer's don't really seem to mind the condition. They seem to be having the greatest fun. You know, so their attention is drawn so deeply inward, they no longer, in fact, recognize what is outward. This station of the inward then starts off. So it has these two drums. It has a conservative drum, which is the significant, and a progressive drum, which is insignificant. So you will hear that people at the beginning stages of Alzheimer's get quite distressed about this growing wave of what's apparent darkness. You know, they recognize they can't remember somebody, and they try and cling on to their capacity to designate significance. It's, you know, and this is also true for people on the path. You know, that kind of like before any major event like Chalwa and so on, you start to cling on the world as you knew it, cling on to that which was significant. But over a period of time, you recognize that's exactly the thing that you need to challenge. So over a period of time, there's an attraction towards the insignificant. In other words, there's a complete deconditioning of the self going on. So, as we indicated, your capacity to designate significance is really based on your socialization. So everything that you regard as significant is all part of the web of judgments that you form in order to live a sensible adult life. That web of judgments eventually becomes inoperable. So you start. I beg your pardon, there's a bit of a riot going on inside my flat door here. So, as I was saying, let me start again because I got myself distracted. Your conditional motive is based on your conditioning, which means to say so this is looking at the problem from the framing of intent. Your conditional motive is based on your conditioning. In order to transcend, to go beyond your conditional motive, it means you have to transcend your conditioning. Your conditioning is everything that you think you are. So your capacity to designate significance is based on your conditioning. But you want to be released from this created creature. You want to experience that raw being that came into the world before it was given the name, before it got the social identity. So you start to recognize that you have to give up what you granted as significant. And so there's this move from the significant to the insignificant. That flip is also simultaneously a complete deconditioning of the self. It's a complete undoing of who you think you are. So basically, the inward is about fana. The inward is about the destruction of the self's experience of existing as a separate being, as a significant separate being. And so that withdrawal inward is also a kind of a dismantling of the identity with form, the identity of my idea as a socially significant being, this whole idea of who I think I am. It's the burning of the mask of the persona. Now, the effect on some people is madness, because they just don't find a way after that. They get lost in this vast wilderness on the inside. They don't find a way of re-engaging with the world. And we call them by nasty names. We say he's got Alzheimer's or he's got senile dementia. That's just our very clumsy way of not actually understanding the significant thing that's happened to this person. But some people have this most amazing gift of going through that crisis and ending up at the most stable station, which is the station of gatheredness, which is what we'll speak about tomorrow. The station of gatheredness is once it's a complete inversion of intent. It's completely inwardly gathered, and you discover what you discover who you really are. Thank you very much, folks. Let's have a look if there are any further questions. Right. The shedding of all identity, yes. Can we say that the inward station is also about affirming your shadow self, your pain, suffering? Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's actually reconciling, because the thing is that it stands to reason. So if you think about identity, this is a bit of a long answer, but I'm going to give it Afia, because I think it might be useful. I walk through the streets of Johannesburg as, say, a young man, and I've got this discourse in my head about the street I'm walking through. I say, well, that's a nice car, and that woman's got a pretty face, and I really want to buy one of those, and Now, I think that the discourse that I'm having with myself as I'm walking through the streets of Johannesburg is describing Johannesburg. It actually isn't. It's basically says more about who I am than about the street I'm walking through. Because everything that I see and comment on to myself as significant actually says what I've been taught to find significant. So my judgments of the world are actually judgments of myself. And each one of those judgments of myself are by definition a cutting off. As soon as you've judged the other, you've put yourself into jail. I mean, as soon as you say, that is this, then I'm separate from that. I'm apart from that. Any judgment of the other is an alienation of the self from the other. And that alienation of the self of the other then produces, for me to be one thing, there's got to be opposite to that thing. For me to be this thing, there's got to be opposite to this thing. So the more I judge the world, the more I'm putting in opposition to me. In fact, the more then I'm judged, because the more all of these things that I've made opposition to me are still, in fact, part of my original unified nature. So not only am I judging the world, I'm actually judging aspects of myself. I'm cutting myself off. I'm isolating myself to a smaller and smaller, more and more restricted part of my own being. So this journey of the inward is about basically reclaiming these bits of myself that I've put into exile by my ongoing judgments. Folks, anybody who claims to have any capacity to be transmitting in terms of tasawwuf, if you find that person an excessively judgmental person, then don't trust them and don't follow them. Because this path is nothing if it's not a path of compassion and tolerance. And the tolerance starts with the menagerie, which is actually inside me, that I've tried to dominate and put into exile for most of my adult life. How would one experience the inward state if not through Alzheimer's or lots of meditation. There are things I could say at this point, but they're probably not for kind of like some of the younger years. Yeah, I think lots of inner work. Is suffering necessary or sufficient condition? So Faisal, suffering is a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. Because suffering puts you at a place of, this is really intolerable. Now, what makes it sufficient is laying the blame appropriately. You could say, this is intolerable and it's all their fault. Well, then you'll stay suffering. You can say, this is intolerable and it must be intolerable because of my expectations of the world. So using that wonderful insight of Sheikh Muhammad al-Habib, who said, don't blame your spouse. Your spouse is like water in a vessel. It's the nature of the water to find where the cracks in the vessel are. In other words, that you stop blaming and you take ownership. You own your suffering. You take your full accountability. You understand that you are absolutely culpable for what it feels like to be in your own skin. So yes, you have to have a miserable experience of being in your skin. That's necessary. It's not sufficient though. It is claiming it as being your own product. That's what makes it sufficient. Then Sheikh, shouldn't this station be about finding new, more wholesome meaning of what you have experienced so far? Yes, I think that's true. I think that is true. No. Right, so Zuhaib. Right, now obviously I need to put my thinking cap on. Apologies in advance for a longer question. Parents and teachers often consciously engineer or inflict suffering. Buggers. Physical and mental on children, at least in my part of the world. Many believe that this is actually beneficial. Yes, indeed. Spare the rod, my boy, and spoil the child. perhaps for the growth of the kids included. My take on this, no, I think it's ridiculous. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that because I was just trying to interpret what you're saying. Zuhaib, if I had been a good parent in my life, and if I had succeeded at this job of parenting, I would have a comment on your question. But regrettably, I don't think I was a very good parent. So there's many things that I did as a young man that I'm quite ashamed of now. I think I was a much harder young man than what I. But then also, I think it is one of the problems of getting old. I mean, you get soft when you get old. That's why one of the reasons why you can't trust old people with the children, because they let them get up to mischief. I mean, I noticed the same thing. So I have a brother who's 18 years older than me, and he was a really rough diamond, this guy. I mean, he could. These days, when he hears I slaughtered an ox or a sheep or something, he gets really disapproving of me, and I'm shocked by this. I said, "But don't you eat meat?" He says, "Yes, but shame, and you can't kill the cow." So maybe we just get very soft as we get old. But I think we are. Well, I was too harsh as a young person, and so I don't want to kind of comment too much about this. So an alternative view is that suffering is engineered in life experience itself, and everyone is more capable of inflicting it to them. I mean, that's also true. But, I mean, look, you do get children who just really are brats. And I mean, they really should be shaken by them, kind of a bit. And because they really are just brats. And I mean, I do sometimes find parents a little bit too indulgent. I mean, just there's almost like a guilt relating to parenting, that a guilt around setting boundaries. Well, so let's not name names here, but so let's say little Adil wants to continue watching TV, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and the parents sort of want to let the child insist the child goes to bed, and the grandparent is saying, "Well, don't upset my grandchild." I mean, that's just not functional. Oh, right. So Anna, sorry for being unclear. I don't mean how to get there. I mean, what would it be like? So, the great mystery is. So let me say this. We can be very distinct about the early stages of how attention matures. We can still get up until stage 6, we can have a very reasonable articulacy around what happens. Stage 7 and 8, this is trying to squeeze an ocean into a thimble. The state itself is so vast. Now, one of the implications of that is that you can't say. This is like rolling the dice, or it's like Russian roulette. Some people go through this thing with incredible eloquence. They don't get dysfunctional. They stay as sharp as knives and as bright as a button right until they die. Other people get really dysfunctional. I do think, however, that chances are, if you've had a prayer life, I mean, this is my experience of people, so let me just prefix this. If the person's had a prayer life and they've deliberately tried to work with the natural process that's going on, this pulling of attention inward, they generally don't get completely dysfunctional. They still get, you can still interact with them, they remain sharp. But so for people who are trying to cling on to their old selves, this pull inwards, that then creates the condition that they become completely dysfunctional. But I mean, this is, I haven't got enough data points for this, Anna. This is speculative. So the best I can do right now is to say, I mean, I know people who are quite advanced practitioners who are actually going quite mad. Who have been, I mean, I've met people, I've known people like that. In our own circle, we have people like that who actually are, they can't be trusted with themselves. They're in la la land. And other people are they stay really functional, but there are clearly people of elevated inner status. Thank you very much, folks. Great seeing you all again. I think there you go. We've done our half an hour. These things seem to be. Oh, sorry. One last shot. One last. We've got to entertain this one, folks. It's lovely. From Ghulam Kafil Sahab. Is the social order despicable? No. The social order is not despicable. Without the social order, we wouldn't be able to raise children. Without the social order, there wouldn't be a platform for us to grow into stations of meaning and the inward. All of these have their place. The problem is that we think the social order is a destination. It's not a destination. It's a way station. That's the issue. It becomes despicable when you think it's a destination. Thank you, folks. All the best. Assalamu alaikum.